Welcome to the Kentucky Geological Survey's Connect with a Scientist series. My name is Sarah Mardon, and today I'm going to talk with Antonia Bottoms, a geologist in KGS's Geologic Mapping section, and Emily Morris, KGS's Cartographic Data Manager. They're going to share with us today why they pursued their careers and how they work together to make maps. Antonia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, I am a geologist working in the mapping section. I map surfacial deposits and I do a lot of the lab analyses on the samples that we collect.
Emily, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Emily. I combine all the data that Antonia and the other field mappers collect, and I just make it look nice on a map, and I help manage that data.
Thank you both. Are you all ready to get started?
Yeah. Let's do this.
Okay, I'll start with Antonia. Why did you decide to pursue a career in geology?
Well, I kind of had a head start. My grandfather was a geologist, and so when I started, we had one of those old school driveways. It was basically the concrete mixed with rock fragments. Mainly, what I came to learn were quartz pebbles. So my mom had really funny stories of me breaking the pockets of my overalls, and this was the 90s, so I wore a lot of overalls. And just filling them with these rocks. And my first collection of rocks was really not very scientific. I think I separated them into pretty and ugly rocks. So my mom kind of kept this in mind when I was thinking of colleges to apply for, and she recommended the University of Kentucky, the geological department, and the rest, as they say, is history from there. So.
That makes sense. I understand the collecting the rocks because they're pretty or interesting or whatnot as well. So Emily, why did you get interested in cartography and geography as an overall field?
Yeah, I have been interested in geography ever since I was a kid. I would always have some kind of toy globe or like a placemat that had a map on it, and I was always interested in looking at why certain things were located in certain places, or like places were named certain things, and just wondered what the landscape and the people were like in all those places. And I had a really good social studies teacher in middle school, and we studied a lot of geography about Africa, and that got me really interested. And then I started taking more classes in geography in high school and then in undergrad. And as soon as I took my first class in geography in undergrad, that's when I knew that's what I wanted to study.
So it sounds like you took a lot of geography classes. So for example, in my school, we usually only had one. So for people that are interested in pursuing a career in that field, I obviously you'd recommend that they would take a lot of classes, but is there anything specific that stands out, like study abroad or particular area of geography?
Not particularly. I was already pretty interested, and then that's when the study abroad opportunities came about. I mean, I did take a study abroad class freshman year when I was still an undecided major, but and we went to Costa Rica, and that was really great. So it's easy to, if you have two or however many $1,000 to sign up for one of those trips, if you're on campus somewhere, there's always some kind of study abroad opportunity usually. So they're good.
I know here there's a lot of opportunities for getting money to help you go to those places too for study abroad. So
Yes, and there's definitely some that you can go and spend the same amount of tuition as you would at home. So
yeah,
Right.
I definitely think I should have taken some of those opportunities.
I think
Yeah,
that
the one I did, it was over winter break. And so you didn't have to pay extra tuition. So that worked out. It was kind of like a 2-week thing, but the summer ones were a lot more expensive because that was extra. So that's another thing you can do.
that's a good point. Antonia, would you like to share with us what you particularly like about geologic mapping?
I think what first drew me was really the field work of getting outside, being able to see these deposits, these surfacial deposits, which they're probably a little bit more easier to see than some of the bedrock mapping that I've done. and being able to actually meet the landowners, the Kentuckians that I've been able to meet along the way. My job has changed a little bit more, so I'm in the lab more. But at the same time, I really enjoyed lab work even as an undergrad. So coming into that kind of part of my brain that loves the details and loves being able to look for patterns in the samples. And so I'm enjoying both of those aspects.
Thank you. And Emily, I think you've covered basically what you studied in school, but if you want to elaborate about that and what you like most about being a cartographer.
Yeah, geography is pretty broad. So both my undergraduate and graduate degrees are in geography, and in undergraduate, I focus more on climatology, and then in graduate school, more of epidemiology. So there's a wide variety of things that I've looked at. But it's helped when I started working here, I got involved with our geohealth research. So we're looking at radon, how that relates to geology and how that affects people. So that kind of ties into my epidemiology research. And but yeah, I like learning from people like Antonia and other people that I work with, because I'm not a geologist by training at all. So it's always interesting to learn new stuff about geology. And I like taking all the information that the field mappers give me and kind of making it my own to try to get it in a way that it communicates all that information most effectively and looks the best. It's kind of, you can get a little creative with cartography, so that's always nice and an enjoyable process.
So you've been involved with the radon potential map, correct?
I wasn't involved in that. That was before my time, but now we're starting different projects, so there'll be more in the future.
Okay, thank you. And so, Antonia, what advice do you have for younger scientists and specifically geologists who are interested in networking or getting involved with an organization?
So yeah, I didn't used to like that word. I thought it sounded so stiff and formal, when really you're just striking up conversations with people that you find to be interesting, that they're doing interesting work. But it's come in handy a lot. Just being able to talk to people as an undergrad, I realized like I should have done more of that. But going on as many professional field trips as you can and meeting these incredible people out there. I've met so many incredible women geologists and men geologists. I'm not saying that I haven't met them too. But it's just been really nice, because then when you want to collaborate with people or you want to springboard ideas off of them, and just hearing about their stories, hearing how they got to be where they are today, and what still gives them passion for what they do is really fascinating to me and really, really helpful.
Thank you. So Emily, you had mentioned that you're specifically a cartographer, and obviously that's a field within geography, but why do you like working for a Geologic Survey over perhaps another organization?
Because the survey's awesome.
Yeah, I get to work with people like Antonia, and there's a lot of flexibility with what I'm working on. Like sometimes I'll work with you, Sarah, on more of a like creative graphic design type of thing, and I don't get to do that a lot, or I didn't get to a lot in school, so that's always fun. And then there's a variety of things, like our maps that we make every year, there's always like 4 or 5 of those, and so that takes up some of my time, but then those finish up in the summer, and then I can have more time to do research projects like the geohealth stuff and just other things that I might be interested in that I can kind of jump in with other people that need my skills. So it's not boring. There's always a new thing to try out and help with.
Thank you. Antonia, could you talk to us? You did a little bit when you were talking about as a child how you collected rocks, but could you talk about how you incorporate geology into your family life now?
So funny story, I still have the geology kind of rock kit that my mom got me. And I kept it in really good condition. So I did hand it to my son. I haven't even looked at it to make sure it's still in the same condition, but he did get really interested in it. And we own about 80 acres, and it goes over streams, and it has some karst, so some kind of sinkhole features. And both my son and my daughter, I've been able to explain these things and break it down to where they can understand them. And they seem to really enjoy it. They'll pick up rocks and ask me, well, what kind of history does this rock have? And hopefully they understand more about, groundwater and even things such as how colluvial landscapes could lead to, landslides. So hopefully they're getting a better appreciation for the land around them. So I try and incorporate that on our hikes. So yeah.
They actually study geology yet at school?
My son we're about to do a kind of hike with the Cub Scouts. So I've seen it more with kind of your outer groups of the Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, probably your FFA, that kind of thing. I haven't really seen it per se in the schools. So I know at the library, I think there are some more opportunities for that kind of outer study. So.
Well, thanks for sharing that. So it sounds like if we have a K through 12 student listening, they might be interested in perhaps joining the Boy Scouts or an extracurricular activity of that nature. So Emily, what data and information do you need from geologic mappers, such as Antonia, when they start making a map?
Yeah, so our field mappers go out and they'll use like an iPad or their phone or something to digitize boundaries and like polygons of geologic map units or lines of where those units connect. And they'll collect samples in the field and then take photos. And so all of those get put on our deliverable maps for the year. All the data that they have is stored in a database, and I just access that database and then put everything on top of each other and make it look nice and organize everything on one big page. So yeah, that's usually how that works. And I can start making like a base map with rivers and roads and stuff like that early on in the season. So then once they're done with the actual geology, I can just go ahead and plug that in there.
Thank you. And so Antonia, what are the steps that you're taking on your end of making a geologic map?
Right. So this has changed since I was hired. Before Emily came, I was doing a lot more we were all given our own maps to do. And so we had to collect our own samples, compile that data, usually in kind of ArcGIS layer file, make our own polygons. And that's changed. We've all started realizing our own strengths. I have more of a strength in lab analyses. So what I do now is I compile my data from the samples that the mappers collect, and I still collect samples as well. And I look at X-rays, basically X-ray fluorescence, which can tell me some of the geochemistry of the sample. I look at X-ray diffraction, which can tell me some of the minerals or the clays in that sample. Grain size, so telling the difference between clay and sand and silt and how those ratios are mixed into each soil sample. And what I can do now is create the nicer graphs, and then I hand those over to Emily, and she makes everything look beautiful. I'll tell you what, when I was doing my own map, it was not as pretty as what Emily can do. I was struggling on that part. So I am personally really thankful for what Emily does for all of our data. And we still follow the kind of same thing where we collect our samples and make sure that we digitize. And so, yeah, so all of that data does go to Emily, and she like spruces it up fantastically.
Well, thank you. So Emily, you talked about a minute ago about what information you would get from Antonia or any of the other mappers, but what are the steps that you take to actually get that final map in place?
Yeah, they'll usually have several drafts throughout the field mapping season, and then I just kind of make sure that I have the final data, the final database, and everything's, I kind of save the small details till the end, like labeling, because that's something that could change, and I don't want to have to redo it. It's kind of a tedious thing, but yeah, usually once the base map is on there and like the polygons for geologic map units, then it's pretty easy, and we can just add like last minute things like our KYTC data, the transportation data, where you can see depth to bedrock. Like I can add that and people can see where the depth of bedrock is in all these places where we have data sets. And yeah, and then I can turn it back to the field mappers, and once they can see it all together, then they can double check and make sure that they mapped it correctly or I'm getting the right data set. And so we kind of go back and forth, and then it's time to turn it in to the US Geological Survey.
Okay, well, thank you. And I think if you all want to elaborate, maybe add anything else about how you work together to make a map. Anything else come to mind?
No, I
Not
just
really.
try not to hound Emily.
Well, that makes sense. So Antonia, I know you're currently working with quaternary age or surfacial sediments, okay? And rather than bedrock, which is mostly what mapping has focused on in the past. So could you share with us why that's important, why people want to look at the surfacial sediments, and perhaps maybe why that might be interesting or useful to someone who is doing a land use plan or a mayor of a city or someone of that nature?
Well, I was trained as a bedrock geologist. And so when I came to the Kentucky Geological Survey and started looking at surfacial deposits, it took me a second to understand that I was looking at these, I guess you could call them softer sediments on top. And when you're looking at surfacial deposits, let's say you're looking at a floodplain, right, around a major river, or you're looking at the colluvial units on your hill slopes, which I think I mentioned earlier. Sometimes if the slope gets to be too steep, you can have an unstable alluvial unit, and that could potentially lead to landslides, which is part of our hazard section. They do a really good job of keeping track on everything on that. So when you're looking at those, you're looking at how they interact with the bedrock, because we still do look at our bedrock maps. They're still super helpful. But we're also looking at how they interact with each other. So how alluvial terraces interact with the floodplains, interacting with the alluvial fans. And then there's colluvial units also interacting with your natural processes as water and gravity-driven processes. So it's cool to me that you can see this huge modern story of what's going on. And I say modern really loosely. Geologic time is kind of tricky if you're not used to it. When I say modern, I'm not talking about like the last 50 years. We're talking about the last couple of thousand years, and even older if you're looking at glacial deposits, which I haven't mentioned yet. But those come into play as well. And I think it's just fascinating for the public. When you think about bedrock, you're thinking about hundreds of thousands, in timeline, right? So it's a little harder to comprehend. And then when you're looking at how this modern landscape is eventually going to lead to those bedrock types, I think it really helps the public to get a good picture in their mind.
Thank you. So Emily, could you talk to us a little bit about the tools and the software that you use when making a map? And maybe even if you want to talk about how we're transitioning from using ArcMap to ArcPro.
Yeah, most of our most of our like storing data, collecting data, analyzing it, it all happens in ArcMap. That's the GIS software that we use, and it's probably the most common. Like all of the standards that we use from the USGS, they're all based in ArcMap, the data structure. So that's how I start the map in ArcMap, because it gives you all the locations and makes it projected correctly. And then I usually, once I get a good base, I usually export everything into Adobe Illustrator, because that just makes it a lot easier to work with and a lot easier to make it look aesthetically pleasing. And yeah, ArcMap is eventually not going to be supported, so we're all trying to learn how to do what we do in ArcPro, which is going to be the new standard. It's a learning curve, because it's a lot different than what we're used to, but I think for people that have never used GIS, it might be a little bit more intuitive, so it might be better for people that are learning in the future, but it's just a hard transition for everyone else.
And I was going to say, we do use Esri's Arc Collector out in the field to make sure when we're putting our samples in, a lot of it comes with a lot of data. So is there the sample depth? Do we see bedrock at this point? And we can even attach pictures to these sample points too, which is really cool. So that also helps us. But I don't know anything about ArcPro anymore, because I'm so much more of a lab person now. But I'm just dreading the part where I'll have to learn more about ArcPro.
Yeah.
From what I understand, it's almost like starting over, but I might be wrong about that. So when you're out in the field and you're collecting that data, do you upload it into ArcMap? What do you do with it when you get back to the office?
Well, the app itself allows me to upload, and then it goes on to, I guess, Esri's kind of online ArcGIS, where we have our own KGS organization. And then from ArcMap or ArcPro, you can log in online to that ArcGIS platform and download that layer file. So I can see, and Emily can see, anybody can see at our organization anyway, where our sample points have been taken.
That's great. So basically you can share everything at one time with everybody. Okay.
Yeah.
And Antonia, would you like to share with us what you like to do outside of work for fun?
So I feel that I change a lot on what interests me. I guess I've always been really passionate about reading. I'm really passionate about getting my kids to read. But I jump. I really love working out. Emily is like better at me than about working out, better than me. But I like working out. I'll try anything really. Like I've tried crocheting, not very well. I've tried gardening, also not really well, because I tend to be like, well, I've planted you, I've watered you, God be with you. Like, hopefully you do something. But I do like a variety of things. I've recently gotten into baking. But I also have kind of a self motto of go big or go home. So my first baking project ever was to make my daughter a unicorn cake, a 3-layer fondant covered unicorn cake. And that just seems to be what I do. I just tend to, oh, well, I'm going to learn this and just go big with it.
So how did it turn out?
It was beautiful. And I think I sweated over it for hours.
Well, I don't know that I'm going to attempt one anytime soon, but I bet it was beautiful. So Emily, outside of your career field and outside of your work, what do you like to do?
Yeah, like Antonia said, I've always been pretty active. So my most recent interest, I kind of jump around like she does. I've been competing in Olympic weightlifting for a few years. That's pretty fun, although my body struggles to hold up sometimes. My joints have taken a lot of pounding over the years. But yeah, and Antonia and I briefly were riding a unicycle or attempting to ride a unicycle, so she is up for anything. I just brought it to work one day and I was like, hey, do you want to try this? She's like, yeah, I do. So
There were some
that's pretty-
epic falls.
yeah.
I've never tried one. Wow, that's interesting. So
Yeah.
I guess I didn't have any other questions. If there's anything else that you all would like to share with people, or if you want to share things for someone that might be interested in becoming a geographer or a geologist, about things that you wish you had done in the past, or just things that you did do that really seemed to help you in your career path.
Yeah, I think like Antonia said, the networking thing, that's kind of a weird word for it, but I became pretty close with my professors. I went to Appalachian State and their geography department's great. It's smaller, it's more personal, there's like, you're not in a big auditorium when you take a class, so your professors get to know you, and just having people familiar with you and what you do and knowing that you're a good student really helps me get a lot of internships, research internships with the National Science Foundation. So that, I think that helped me get into a good graduate program. And then from there, I learned a lot more about cartography specifically. So I have a friend that she's involved with the North American Cartographic Information Society, or NACIS, and they are really good with being involved with students and all kinds of professionals, and they're really welcoming, and they make, if you attend their conference in person, they have a lot of workshops from professionals all over the map. Like my friend works for the Washington Post as a graphics editor, and she's really familiar with stuff like that, or people that work for National Geographic, and you can connect with those people. And I kind of found out that they're pretty active on Twitter actually. And so they will always post, like that community always posts tutorials on how to do stuff that I wouldn't have even thought about. So I always bookmark those. I'm like, oh, I'll come back to this later. And it's really helpful. So, and they will, like NACIS, they'll put their conference videos online, especially after the pandemic. I was watching a lot of those. So that's always a good thing to look into.
So that's an organization that as a student, you can really find some resources, but also later on as a professional too. So that's great.
Yeah.
And Antonia, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to say I grew up being pretty scared of asking questions just because everybody already thought I was smart. So I thought that I really needed to uphold this kind of view of myself. And I don't want people to be scared. Like, if you have a question, you just need to ask it. Most of the time, people have already had this question. And yeah, if you're able to kind of joke around, about it, like you'll end up probably making a friend. I mean, I am silly probably more often than I'm serious. See, Emily's already laughing. And so just don't be afraid. Like I was just so scared of looking dumb that I think I really missed out on connecting with people and being able to understand certain subjects easier. I always felt like I had to go around and find it in a book or find it online. And yeah, and just being not afraid to reach out to people. Most people are willing to respond to an email, and just saying, hey, I'm interested in your work. Can you, send me a couple of papers, or, can I meet with you? So just not being afraid is really, like, I think a key factor in almost anything you go into.
I think that's really good advice. And particularly the last part is good advice if you're looking for a mentor. Sometimes we all find mentors easily. We encounter someone that has a shared interest, and sometimes it's a little bit harder. So, well, I guess that's the end. If you all have anything else to add, then I think we'll end the interview. Thank you both so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. This has been
Thanks.
fun.